Welcome to episode 27 of Sullivan Street. I am Eric Vogelsang, and today is going to be the Woodstock show, including, by the time we got the Woodstock review, their performance at Woodstock 99 and all sorts of other Woodstock memories and notes. But first, let's say hi to my co-host, Chris Meigs. Chris, good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, Eric.
And you have kind of exciting update, which we'll get to in a second. You went to the Underwater Sunshine Fest. I do also want to mention, though, on today's episode, two popular prior guest hosts. First, we'll say hi to Bootleg Rich, who also featured prominently in our last official bootleg episode, Face the Promised Land. Rich, good afternoon.
Hello. Just continue to keep your expectations low, and then anything above that is a good night.
We're loving this, and if we have any other bootlegs from 1999, 2000, we'll definitely have you on.
Once you hit 2000, it's all downhill.
And since this episode is going to include a little bit of music, American music history, and not just about the kind of grows, we needed our history expert, Geoff Harkness. Jeff, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Always fun to be here. Rich, at least you didn't have to pay them to be here like I did. So consider yourself lucky.
Yeah. The kickback of royalties. No, this will be kind of a neat, and I'll give Chris credit because part of this is that we're basically the 25th anniversary of Woodstock right this year and 25th of these bootlegs. But first, just quick news and notes. And that Chris just last weekend went to the Underwater Sunshine Fest. Do you want to give us a little recap?
It was a good time. I went on Friday night. As it's back at the Bowery Electric now. There were a few years where it was at Rockwood Music Hall, but I've always loved the Bowery Electric. Right on Bowery, it's a great energy, a really fun room to see bands in. A lot of bands that were new to me. Some years there have been times in the festival's history where they were the bands were kind of like known to at least the sort of Counting Crows community, I guess you could call it. But this year, pretty much all fresh bands. So got there right away. Saw a band called Kids That Fly that I thought were really, really fun. Really enjoyed a band afterwards. James Campion, who I saw. Good to see you, James. Highly recommend the next band called Loose Buttons. And they were great. They would probably be, if I'm picking one band as like a recommendation out of these, Loose Buttons, go check them out. Very, very cool band called Mary Shelley, as in Mary Shelley, like Frankenstein. They kind of looked like vampires. It was super cool. They were a very, very fun band to watch and listen to. Band I saw up, there's two stages going on simultaneously. There's the main downstairs stage, and then there's a little thing in the map room at Bowery Electric upstairs. Saw a band upstairs called Gold Pine that I thought were really fun, and really was a guy and a gal, and she told wonderful stories and was very engaging, and again recommend them as well. Also saw a band, a band that's been around for a while that I guess had passed me by, because they were talking about how they've been doing this since like the mid 90s, and you're like, oh shoot, well I guess I'm late to the party here. But Red Wanting Blue was very, very cool. It was a very fun, it's interesting and like a fun lineup. It's interesting this year because I was going in cold because we didn't have come on, James. Pod and Adam podcast previewing the band. So I was just kind of going in like, I'm going to go listen to some music tonight. And it was a great lineup and a good, almost full house, but just a great time. And I highly recommend it if you're in New York around that time. There's always good bands. There's always good bands, and it's a good opportunity to get exposed to new music, which is sometimes hard, right? Sometimes we get stuck in our ruts. And there's just I've never gone to an Underwater Sunshine Festival or Outlaw Roadshow and not come away with at least one band that I was like, those guys are pretty good. I'm going to listen more.
Yeah, no, as you said, I guess they published a list of bands on the website, and they'll do it next year. But you would have had to done your own research to beforehand to do that. So, and you only went
there
the
was
first
a list, but we got so many Counting Crows bootlegs in the world to listen to.
I know.
If you don't tell me that I got to listen to this or that, it's hard.
And you went to the first night. It was Friday. So if it's the same thing next year, it's a Friday night and a Saturday night. It looked like the hours were about 6 to midnight, both nights. So night, 8 to 10 bands. So, okay, great.
Yeah. And then they cut it off, and then it becomes a disco. So if you want to stay out late and dance
is that true?
with the kids.
I was wondering what they do after midnight. Right. Okay.
Oh, it's a club. There's actually, this didn't happen to me. I left a little bit early. I was a little tired. But I have been at shows there before where show ended. I like went back to the back bar downstairs to have a drink. And as I was like talking to the person I was with, like, and just kind of focused on them, like I turned around and I was like in the middle of like a club and people were dancing. And I was like, oh, I guess that's why the band really needed to end at that specific time, because it's a disco now and I need to get out of here. I'm good.
My age,
have fun, everyone.
My age, my kids, I'm out of here. Yeah, I might try to go. Yeah, I don't want to talk too much about something a year in advance, but I might try to go. Maybe we'll even make it Underwater Sunshine Fest / Sullivan Street Fest or something like that.
Hey, yeah, we'll do a live podcast.
Yeah.
Pre-party. Live podcast pre-party. That's actually not a terrible idea.
Not a horrible idea. And the other two people here are from the East Coast too, although everybody has kids and they're old and, don't like staying up past 9 or waking up past.
But that's what I'm saying. It's a pre-party because it's like, we can start at like 4:30 in the afternoon.
True. And then we can give live recap on the first bands and how we went home after that. Yeah, great. No, thank you. Thank you so much. Awesome. So, and we did want to say we haven't all listened to it yet, so let's not talk about it too much. But that Adam Duritz is on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, The Wonder of It All, and it was actually the first episode of that podcast, released September 30th, 2024. And as Geoff said, the man hosting the podcast was from what 90s band?
Harvey Danger.
Right?
Who had the hit Flagpole Sitta.
Great song. Good band too. I'm thinking of Lit. I'm sure Harvey Danger was fine too. I just really like that Lit album, and I think I get Lit and Harvey Danger confused because Lit had My Own Worst Enemy, which is kind of similar to Flagpole Sitta, but I liked both of those songs, and I apparently can't. This is very exciting, guys. But yes, Harvey Danger. So yes,
it looked like
was he a good host? I guess it sounds like he was a good host. It was a 3-hour podcast.
Yeah, that's why I was going to bring it up. That the Crows fans, I know you've listened to some podcasts where Adam's on for 25 at the most 60 minutes. So this is 3 hours. So I'm going to block off some time and listen to it. So.
Yeah, I thought it was one of the best interviews I've heard with him in years. Very insightful, very interesting, and it felt like more of a conversation just because he was talking to someone who was a fellow musician and at least who had some sense of what it was like to, be in a band that was touring and around during the same time. So I thought it was a unique and special interview, and I definitely recommend the hardcore fans. And if you're listening to this podcast, you probably are one. If you haven't heard it already, it's definitely worth listening. I got sucked into it. Loved it.
So Geoff, we need you to listen to all of these and then just make version 2 of the book.
Right.
And then we'll get the update.
All right.
All consolidated.
Yeah, I know. It's
that's what you can do. Just a podcast book. So let's take our own trip to Woodstock. And we're going to talk about Woodstock in 3 and by the fact of me saying we're going to do Woodstock in 3 parts, and this is why we didn't do by the time we got to Woodstock first, because if we were going to cover both bootlegs, official bootlegs, which we are now, this one was released before Face the Promised Land. I think we said 6 months before. I do know though that this by the time we got to Woodstock was released January 13th, 2000. Another and first release from that famous Potato Dog Records that we joked about. So as and again, I have the hard copy because I'm lucky and my friend sent it to me because again, I did not order it at the time. And when I was deciding on these, and I hadn't listened to them as much because I didn't own them for most of my fandom days, Chris had to kind of remind me, oh, by the way, by the time we got to Woodstock is not the Woodstock, which some people might think, but it's from, is it a week or two before? It's the lead up to the shows. And I even looked, I made the stats, and it's basically evenly split up, which is that it's from 5 different shows from July 12th to July 20th. And they performed in Woodstock July 24th. So it really was the week before, or I guess the earliest one was 12 days before to 4 days before. And just since we're doing the official stuff, I might as well list it that the shows were in two in Canada, 2 in Ontario, 1 in Michigan, 1 in New Jersey, and 1 in Rhode Island. And from all of those, so from those shows, for 2 of the shows they took 2 songs, and for the other 3 shows they took 3 songs. So it's evenly distributed. Do you have any other
interesting
background?
period? An interesting sort of contextually, right? So this is July of 1999. This Desert Life is going to come out later in this year, but it's not out, and there's no singles from it at this point. This is the first time that the band has played live regularly in about a year and a half. They had played some one-off shows. I think there's a couple of Viper Room shows in 1998. It's not like they hadn't played, but basically the Recovering the Satellites tour ends in December of 1997 in Europe, and this is them kind of like coming back. These were also the first, like regular shows with Imi as a band member. Imi is now playing.
Okay.
And I feel like you can kind of hear, I think these are, it's a great run because the band is in a really energetic, invigorated spot. And because you don't have the This Desert Life material yet, obviously the material lands much more on August and Recovering the Satellites. And I think it's a lot of really good versions of those songs. It's a really interesting to hear kind of a different version of the band now with Imi sort of full time taking on that batch of songs kind of for not the last time, but you know what I mean? The last time that before This Desert Life comes out, and it really, you start to see a real expansion of the band's catalog, and they kind of keep going. They play a lot of This Desert Life. The next year, they're already playing Hard Candy songs before they're released. These are kind of the last shows where it's really those first 2 records. And I think what you get on this album, we'll talk deep dive, but I think there's some really great versions of those songs in the first 2 records.
I know Imi was not an official member on Desert Life. Did he always tour with them starting on this one? No.
Starting with this one. No, starting with this one, he's always in the band.
That's what I meant. Starting on this one, was he always on tour with them? Okay. And just to get it's so interesting, like you said, because this was recorded in, what do we say, July. And then the Face the Promised Land was recorded when, Rich? That was in the fall, right?
December 2nd.
Yeah. So that was just 6 months later, and that one had all this. Yeah. So they weren't like you said, Chris. They weren't previewing Desert Life songs like they were when before Hard Candy was released. So 6 months, and this was released 6 months before Face of Promised Land, as I said.
Yeah, they're playing a couple. If you look at the set list, you will see hanging around. I assume they knew that was going to be a single, and a couple of the other ones pop up, but it's not. It's maybe 2 or 3 songs in a set of like 18 or 19 songs, as opposed to like when they played Hard Candy and they were already doing 7 or 8 of the new ones.
Yeah, they were doing though about 2 or 3 songs from Desert Life in every show during those lead ups. So it's interesting that none of them make the bootleg because they were playing Hanging Around. They were playing St. Robinson. They were playing Mrs. Potter's. They played Speedway. They played 4 Days. All of these in those July shows somewhere, not necessarily these ones that were bootleg. So they were featuring and trying out some of those songs for the first time, but interestingly, they didn't choose to select any of them on the bootleg. And of course, at Woodstock, they just played Hanging Around from Desert Life, previewed that. But otherwise, you don't hear much of Desert Life in I guess what we'll probably talk about today. But they were testing out those songs and kind of finding themselves, I think, as a live group again, because they had only played 1 show in 1998. And in 1999, the first show they played, I believe, was July 1st. So this was really the start of a long period of inactivity for them as a live band. And having Imi in the group, Adam really talked about in interviews at the time how much he loved having Imi in the group, how much that had invigorated them. And just you really hear it in the bootlegs and these shows that we'll talk about, even in the bootleg from December, how much Imi was contributing to the band and sort of expanding their palette and changing their sound. It's an interesting and cool kind of period for them. in the lead up to the release of Desert Life, where suddenly that becomes a big feature of the live, shows.
Geoff, thanks for doing that. The only thing I didn't do for my homework was actually look at the other songs played during those 5 shows, and you did that. So, because I was kind of curious, if Desert Life songs were played or not. Before we get into the set list, Rich, did you have any? I guess, like, when did you listen to this? I forget. I don't think you had the official. So, like, when did you? Yeah.
I had Face the Promised Land. I didn't get the Woodstock, and I think it wasn't for lack of trying. I think they were very limited through the fan club at the time, and I just didn't get one. But someone posted it pretty shortly thereafter and was able to download it. I don't think Face the Promised Land is almost in my DNA, maybe because I was there. I just kept listening to the show. This one, it was a real revisiting for me to go back and listen to this. And probably one of their only official album release where it feels like the live tracks were from all different shows kind of compiled together. Yeah. Although Underwater Sunshine, maybe, I don't know.
Underwater a few different shows.
I think
but over the course of like a year, it's a little. I mean, there's a couple of it, little bit, but yeah, this is an interesting. It's interesting because it's like a best of like a fairly compact tour, which is kind of interesting. It's kind of unique.
I did stumble across a weird piece of trivia. I don't know if you all caught this. The connection with Joni Mitchell.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So she's got the very famous song Woodstock that she wrote right after the real Woodstock that has the lyric by the time we got to Woodstock. And that song was officially on the B side of Big Yellow Taxi when that single was released. And so I thought it was this really interesting Counting Crows tie-in there 30 years prior.
I knew we brought you in for a reason. That is great trivia. I didn't know, and then I forgot that by the time I actually didn't realize that. I figured there was a double meaning there, not just the build-up, but then I didn't realize it was the Joni Mitchell connection.
Yeah, I guess she didn't play because her manager talked her out of it, said go play Dick Cavett or appear on Dick Cavett. And so she was dating Graham Nash at the time, who was there, and telling her how it was going. She watched it, so she wrote that song from this deep angst of wishing she was there. And it was all released in 1970.
Awesome.
Interestingly, sort of the opposite, because I feel like when Adam and the guys have talked about Woodstock '99, they maybe wish they weren't there. But we'll get there in a second. But it is interesting, just Woodstock maintains such an interesting like place in musical culture that it's sort of that the relationship to it for anyone is very important.
No, for sure. Okay. So if nobody has any other comments, we'll go right into the set list. Kind of do song by song where I think it's interesting, or we can stop if there's one you really want to, or although I might take it like by block, like I kind of did last time, or at least take a couple songs in a row. So for now, I'll just start with the first 3 songs, partly which is Mr. So the first 2 are the same as the Face the Promised Land disc, which is Mr. Jones on the kind of start acoustic and then move right, the kind of mixed method song, which is kind of the same, and then Angels of the Silences, which I thought was pretty similar to also Face the Promised Land, and then Recovering the Satellites, which again, I'm still surprised to this day is such a regular song for them, because it's not poppy. It wasn't a single, but they love playing it. I love hearing it. The only comment I have on those 3 songs, and you might have a lot more, is that when they started the Mr. Jones, and again, maybe it could have been just, I don't know where in the set list of that. I forget what song it was from. That was from the Rhode Island show. I don't know where in the set list it was there, if it was the first song, but I noticed that the crowd was going nuts even with the acoustic beginning, and it made me think, is it just because Counting Crows went on the stage and the crowd's going nuts and they were really popular then, or was it that they actually knew the acoustic version from from the 10 spot and the VH1 Storytellers? In fact, even when Charlie got on the accordion, played, the place went nuts, and you wouldn't really expect that for the nowadays. It'd be like, this is not the version I know from the video. But Chris, let's go to you from the first couple songs.
Well, it is so it is the opener. They opened with that. So it's interesting they opened with that version of Mr. Jones into Angels of the Silences a bunch on this tour. And obviously they opened it with Face the Promised Land too. They must have really been enjoying that combo. It's great. I mean, it's a great combo.
Yes.
Like we heard it on Face the Promised Land, but then hearing it again, I was like, man, that is a really good 1-2 punch to open a show. I think that's pretty great. You also think they're in these shows, they're generally playing rooms that by the standards of the band at the time were kind of underplays, right? That song is from Lupo's in Providence, Rhode Island, which is a relatively small room given where they were playing last time was like, sheds and big theaters, big theaters. So they're kind of like doing, again, just kind of smaller theaters to like as kind of a on this path of getting back out there. And I do think that's probably part of it. People are real excited and they're probably close to the band and the band sounds great. I will say, these first 3 songs, I really feel like you hear how good, like what an interesting place Adam is in on these songs. He's singing the shit out of them. And he's like, I feel like Mr. Jones especially is one of those classic Adam performances where he's like playing with the melody and he's finding different ways to sing things. I noted down like the way he sings "You Should Not Believe in Me" is super cool in this version of the song. He switches, I think he used this in Woodstock too. We want to be big stars, but then we get a record contract and get all fucked up about that, which I like. And again, I love on like Recovering the Satellites. I love like how quiet he gets in the bridge and kind of comes back. Like it's a lot of good Adam stuff. One other note on Recovering the Satellites, which I noticed watching the video later, Imi's playing pedal steel. I don't think he does now even on that, but it's a very cool, I think, addition to that arrangement.
Thank you. Rich, any other thoughts about the first 3 songs?
Recovering is a song that I enjoy. It's not one that really sticks to me. The version on the bootleg is really beautiful. I think the quiet parts you mentioned, Chris, the combination of, I don't know if it's electric organ and the steel pedal. It's the mix, really, you pick up on this mix. And I really thought it was well done. Other than that, with Angels, I just feel like they're putting their 150% effort into it. And it wasn't much long after that. We don't see that version live much longer. And so it was just a great version.
Yeah, Geoff.
Yeah, I think starting with Mr. Jones, they did open these shows with Mr. Jones a lot, and again, you have to remember sort of where they are as a band. And that's a band that's coming off of an album that they thought was going to be, the biggest thing that they had done, and in some ways was rejected by the mainstream, at least compared to the first album. They put out the live album, which we didn't talk about this as much, but that live album really further alienated them from mainstream audiences. The mainstream public did not like the fact that this band that they wanted to go away now put out a very challenging double live album that required some, really sit down and listen to sort of thing. On the other hand, the hardcore fans embraced them more than ever because of that same album. And so they had, in some ways, their audience had sort of bifurcated. I think by opening with Mr. Jones, this was a song that they had rejected and refused to play at a lot of shows early on in their first couple of years. Now they're opening with this song. They're reclaiming this song. They want it back. They want to say, wait a minute, that's our song, and we're not going to reject it. We're not going to hide from it. In fact, we're going to open with it. And it's almost like a declaration or like a statement of intent by starting with that song. I thought it was like in this show, it's a nice, cool, like faithful version. The Electric Angels, again, here's a band that still has something to prove. They're still fighting for a place in the music scene, and I think the version on the bootleg in particular is really slamming, like a really good rock and roll version of that song. And like Rich said, we don't hear them do that anymore. And this is a different band that we've got today. And this is a great reminder of that.
Oh, great. Thanks so much.
I will say though, Geoff, it's interesting though. So like they're coming out and they're opening with Mr. Jones, but they're still doing the sort of beginning and end stuff from the storytellers. Adam's still not like singing it straight. It's like it's a very Counting Crows move, right? To be like, hey, we're gonna start with Mr. Jones. You guys all like Mr. Jones, right? We're not gonna do it the way you want to.
Right.
So we're gonna give you what you want, but we're gonna give it to you the way that we want to give it to you. And like kind of confront, like it's not we're not totally withholding, but also we're not just gonna go out here and like play the hits like we're a
Not
a
at
band in
all.
the 60s.
No, totally. They're reclaiming things on their own terms. I think is a way I would put it. It's like we're going to embrace this song again, but we're going to do it on our own terms, not because of some expectation or something like that.
Yeah.
Great. So let's move to the next quarter of the set list, which is Have You Seen Me Lately, Daylight Fading, and Mercury. Of course, I'll never, now, instead of Mercury, instead of thinking of some Toxic X, I always think of Chris Miggs, who loves that song. So for, it's so funny about the Have You Seen Me Lately. I had the note here, and again, I only got a chance to listen to this once, but the note that I had was actually validated, which we'll talk about later, by Adam, because he plays the same version of the song at Woodstock. Because I joked that the Have You Seen Me Lately, I said, this is the daylight fading version of this song. And what I mean by that is it's like mid-tempo, right? It's not the hard one and it's not the acoustic one. And I was like, I know I've heard this before, but I didn't. So I was like, oh, it kind of reminds me of Daylight Fading, which is like mid-tempo. And then they played Daylight Fading next, which I actually think, correct me if I'm wrong, is the only version of Daylight Fading on one of the official live recordings. I could be wrong about that. Again, they don't play that song that much, given that it was a single, I always say. And then Mercury, wait, remind me, Geoff, is Mercury about Courtney Cox or not? I know Monkey is.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I kind of thought that it was always a mix of Courtney and someone, but okay. So it was definitely.
Well, he gives the intro in this one, about the.
Well, yeah, and I've heard that intro before, and then part of me was like, where is she now? But we know where Courtney Cox is now. She's probably back to recording Scream 7 or whatever, 8. Chris, I'll go to you next.
Well, no, so I'm with you. I really like the Have You Seen Me Lately mid-tempo. I like kind of all the versions of that song. It's one of those songs, it's almost like it's proof of how good that song is, that they can just sort of play it slow, middle, it all kind of works. So yeah, I like that arrangement. I thought Daylight Fading, Dan really rips that solo. That's kind of my takeaway, because in Adam intro is like, this song features Dan, and then Dan like really crushes that solo in Daylight Fading. Yep. Mercury, again, you know me, I love Mercury. I love the speech. My favorite line from it: everything she touched turned to shit, and she touched me all the time.
Right, I did. That actually is pretty memorable.
That's great.
Yeah, I might have to write that one down.
Yeah.
Although at my age now, I'm not as bitter about my exes as I was. But in like my early 30s, that would have been a great line about the.
Yeah.
Because I do. It got me. I know we already talked about Mercury, but it got me thinking about. Yeah, because I met when I went to New York recently. I met like my first serious girlfriend, and it's funny. And that was like, let's just say, I think it was exactly 25 years since we broke, something like that. But I don't know. What struck me and it really hit hard. That made me think of you, Chris, was that we hung out for like 3 or 4 hours at night. Mm-hmm. All of the super charming points were exactly the same. Like, oh, this is why I like this girl. And then all of the toxic and annoying things, like people do not change that much, no matter what we like to think. Let's go. So, Chris, sorry to cut you off. But,
you're saying that it wouldn't have been fun if she would have been the one.
No, exactly. Because I was like, I would have had a heart attack already. Yeah, no. Yeah, but you had the tolerance for it because it was the first serious girlfriend, right? Kind of thing. Yeah,
we all learn about ourselves over time. I like the one thing I was thinking about during this version of the song is just the band's arrangement really brings out like the like it's part and parcel with Adam giving the speech and kind of breaking the song down for people, but the arrangement really brings out the sinister energy in the song that I think wasn't really there on the original version or even on the Across a Wire version. Like, I feel like it really brings out like they are playing the darkness of that song to the way he's presenting it. And I think that's why it's only these versions that really started to get me into the song, is like the dark energy in the arrangements really works. My feeling.
Oh. Great. Rich, any thoughts on these three?
Well, on Just a few. On Have You Seen Me Lately, I thought that right around that 2 minute 30 mark, there's this guitar, I don't know what you call it, lick, fast strumming that was really good. With the guys were just, I don't know if it was Dan or Amy, like they were just going to town in the middle of How You See Me Lately in a way I don't think isn't on the album's versions. And
is it possible it was Matt too, or maybe not? I don't know. I know he used to strum some stuff, but anyway,
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
In Mercury, he starts off with that like kind of like the story of this relationship and how toxic it was, and like Chris said, it's that darkness with this song. But the way he ended it, with the way he was singing "She's All Right with Me," I felt like by the time he was performing at this point, like he was over it, he was okay, and it was just like, yeah, this shitty thing happened in the past, but like I'm good now. It doesn't bother me as much. That was my kind of interpretation of this performance of it.
Yeah, Geoff, your thoughts on these three songs?
Yeah, I like the sort of daylight fading-esque version of Have You Seen Me Lately too. I think in this particular version, Rich, this we may be talking about the same thing or maybe not, but what the thing that stood out to me in listening to this bootleg again was that early REM influence. There's like arpeggiated guitar work in the chorus, particularly you hear it. And it was very like here you really hear the REM influence shine through in this group in a way that um, that's always in there, but here it's very direct and maybe deliberate, and I like that about it. I like what they did with this version a lot. I thought it was very cool. Into Daylight Fading, of course, very makes perfect sense. Mercury, I thought this was a really just epic version. I loved it. I thought it was very cool. I am a fan of the Courtney Cox suite, but he talks in the intro. He says the line 50 miles of bad road. And if people caught the reference, that's a reference to the line 3 miles of bad road, which is from The King of Comedy, the REM song that came out on Monster.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
That song's about Courtney Love, a different Courtney. So there's another little a hook for you super fans paying attention at home. So yeah, he talks about 50 miles of bad road, whereas Courtney Cox was described as only 3 miles of bad road. So Courtney Cox apparently has 47 more miles of bad road to go in there.
Well, that's impressive.
Yeah, right. For I think we've had this question before, but the Courtney Cox suite was the final set of songs that Adam wrote after breaking through his writer's block on Recovering the Satellites. He did write the song Recovering the Satellites prior to that. That was early on, and that references, it says Monkey, so it references her. That was the very ending of the third suite. If you want to know what the 4 suites are, if you just look at the back of the CD, even it's divided into 4 parts. So the double album, there's 4 sides to it. Those are the 4 suites as Adam intended it. There's 2 sides. The first side is about experiencing fame. The second side is about coming to grips with fame. But the 4th suite is the Courtney Cox suite. And the Courtney Cox suite, it's, what is it? Monkey, Mercury, Long December, and Walkaways. And so here you have Mercury, which that's one of my all-time favorite songs from Counting Crows. I love it. I think it's a very cool song. And to me, this version is particularly epic. This is a song I think they could still do today. It's really still in their wheelhouse. Musically, they could pull it off. I think Adam could still sing this song vocally, but maybe it's just too personal or something like that. You don't hear it as much. But what a treat to hear here. I thought the version here was outstanding. I loved it. One of the real highlights to me of this bootleg.
Yeah, they haven't played it since 2016 was the last time. That was once they played it 12 times in 2015. I guess that was the most recent year they played it even a little bit. But I mean, if you look back, if you look at the page on setlist.fm, it's really, once you get past 99 and 2000, the bars are pretty small.
Yeah.
Pretty small.
Yeah. I'm going to just remind that both of Geoff and Chris are mild hypocrites because I think of Chris, I think of you with Mercury, but you had it number 7 on your, which is right in the middle of Recovering the Satellites. And Geoff, you had it at number 8. Which just means you other liked other songs more, of course. I'm just teasing you. But,
and what I would say, part of what I'd say is that I'm very partial to the 99 2000 era live versions of Mercury.
Yeah, and I think you said that at the time, actually.
I did see them play it once in 2008. It was very awkward because, again, Adam talks about it's not a song about love; it's a song about addiction,
Right.
And it's a version at the Wellmont, right, where he takes this. The line that he repeated a bunch was "Stick a needle in your arm and it feels like love." And I was with a friend at the time, and I was very excited for the song. And she's like, "Okay, I don't know the song that well." And she's like, "What is he talking about?" And I'm like, I don't know. It's still great though, right?
But it's funny. I guess even though I knew from Geoff last time about the Courtney Cox suite, because I didn't really know that before, it does make it. Yeah, it adds a little. I don't know how to say. Like maybe we all know, if we didn't date, we all know people who have dated or know women or whatever, or men, of course, who would have that Mercury influence on us about thinking the addiction. But if you think about how it might be even more difficult to break up with someone who has the charm and all these good, but the negative, and they're also one of the most popular and famous actresses at the time and the height of her physical looks or whatever, then yeah, you could see where he would become quote unquote addicted to that for a little bit. So yeah. Okay, great. Let's move to the third quarter, or what I'm going to call the August quarter, because they Omaha, Round Here, Rain King, and Murder One. So for August and everything after songs. I don't have any comment about Omaha. I always like hearing it live. It was also in Face the Promised Land. Round Here, and as we know from, we did a whole episode on Round Here, that I'm not always, especially at this time, I was not a diehard fan of the long, alty Round Here versions. I thought this was fantastic. I thought there were tons of little, which Chris, I'm sure, and Geoff and Rich will bring up, a lot of little musical extras, if you will, that that I just thought added to it. I was glued to to listening to it when I was, and had even some extra na-na-na-nas at the end, which I wish they would bring back, actually. I thought that was great. You can talk about that. Rain King. I think, was this also a daylight fading version of Rain King, Geoff? I think it was also more of a mid-tempo. Maybe I was wrong about that, but that's maybe in my mind, that's what it was. A little less powerful and definitely a little different than how they do it now. Like there's a set way they kind of do Rain King now. I thought it was a little different. And Murder of One, we've talked about a number of times on this show, how I totally miss hearing this live. It's such a, I don't know. Yeah, it was a fantastic way to either end regular set lists or the main set of the show. So yeah, I'll just let you guys fill in the blanks there. Chris, on to you.
So yeah, this Round Here was, I just have in my notes the word spectacular in all caps.
Yep.
It's really fucking great. I like a lot of what they do here, particularly so it starts with Adam kind of doing this vocalizing at the top over like Charlie on organ, which is really, really cool. And then they kind of go to this vocalize, like before they get to like a proper alt, they go to this like la vocalizing, and then the rest of the guys sing that with Adam. So they're harmonizing together on it. And then Adam goes into, first of all, there's a bit about not wanting to be locked in your room, which I was thinking is something he's kind of returned to a bunch with Round Here, like the Come Outside alts and some of the more recent ones too. But he goes into Goodnight Elizabeth. And when he gets to the Queen of California part, the band goes back to singing that la vocal, harmonizing over the top. It's so good. And it's one of those things where it's not, it's great when Adam is sort of driving things and the band is following him. But this is really, they're like arranging this whole thing together. And it's like, it's not just, like Adam's got this cool idea. It's like a full arrangement that these guys are just sort of like improving off the top of their heads. It's so good. And again, it's one of those ones that's not like, maybe there's one or two other versions a little bit like this, but this is not like a common one they did a bunch of times.
Yeah, that's
I hadn't thought about it in forever, and I'm like, how have I forgotten? It's so good. Yeah, that was really, really amazing. Rain King, I think, is also a pretty good version. Adam swipes some lines from a Rolling Stones song called "Have You Seen Your Mother?" Mm-hmm. And I like there's some other riffy improv stuff about like, if I could be silent, I'd close my eyes and wait until the last train passed by to say to you that when I think he like goes into that last bit with this really cool kind of like run-on sentence thing that I don't know. I liked it. It's a good version of it. Although I tend to be more partial. I tend to be more partial to either the really upbeat or slower versions of Rain King. The middle still works for me. But that round here, if you listen to one thing from this record, go find that round here and listen to that is my highest recommendation.
Great. Oh, and then anything on Murder One, except that probably not. Except that you love it.
I did like the energy's really good in it, but that bit where he's like, "I've gone to wherever the fuck we are, and I am all alone."
Yeah,
I like that. Apparently, wherever the fuck we are was Kitchener, Ontario.
I was going to say Kitchener, Ontario. At
which
was it Lulu's Roadhouse?
No disrespect to the fine people of Kitchener, Ontario, but also, I don't know where the fuck that is. So I'm with that on
that one. Rich, we'll go to you.
Yeah, Chris covered that really well. I'll just stick with around here, I think, which I felt was deeply reflective version, very introspective. That I think it's very unique. I don't recall hearing it other places. I'm sure they might have, but it's not one I really knew. So it was great rediscovering it again. And it had the way they sang this one, that kind of time period, they were really upbeat because they were back together and playing. But this one, you felt a little bit like that. Were they feeling a little bit of the malaise of the touring? I don't know. But it was very, very good. And it's interesting that they weaved in Goodnight Elizabeth. And then on the bootleg, they added Goodnight Elizabeth, which I don't think he would ever do if he was in one night set list. I don't know if he would sing it kind of twice the same night. But so it's kind of a little treat because I love Goodnight Elizabeth. You get to hear it twice, kind of in one setup.
And by the way, Kitchener really is. I can see. I mean, besides the fact of a name that nobody knows, I just figured it was like an inner suburb of Toronto, but it's an hour and a half out.
Oh wow!
And about an hour and a half from Niagara Falls. So I don't know how they chose that. I don't know.
I wonder if it was like calling the manager and saying, "Just get me a bunch of shows before Woodstock. Like wherever we gotta play, we gotta get back out." I don't know. It might have been that.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. Let's go to Geoff.
Yeah, I think Omaha really, something that stood out to me is the interplay between the mandolin and the accordion. You know, this is where, you know, Emmy really having, Emmy on board, you really shines in a song like this. And you really see like kind of who Counting Crows is going to become. You know, this is sort of who they are now with Emmy and integrating all of these different instruments and backing vocals in ways that they really, you know, weren't doing when they first came out and were kind of this raw band. Round here, I really love that jazzy kind of scat singing that Adam does. It's almost like Horse Dreamers Blues a little bit. The Locked in My Room, I mean, to me, it like evoked In My Room, the great Beach Boys song, and Brian Wilson talking about, you know, locking himself in his room and, you know, imagining all of this stuff about the great good life on the beaches of California. And so I thought in some ways it kind of brought up a little bit of that. I thought that was really cool. You know, Adam's still like a singer. I wrote a note on here that the backing vocals are genuinely great for once, you know, really kind of what Chris was talking about. This was a group where the backing vocals hadn't really come together, I think, until later, and then later became a real central feature of what they do, an important part of their sound. It became integral to their studio sound. You hear that really, I think, particularly on Desert Life and Into Hard Candy. But here you hear that live for the first time, and the intricacies, sort of what Chris was talking about, I thought were very cool. Listen to how the band turns on a dime when they go back into the song with the girl on the car in the parking lot. I mean, just so tight, such a great, you know, live band, with all of that going on too. And then I love the Have You Seen Your Mother Baby Standing in the Shadow alt that from the great 1966 Rolling Stones album Between the Buttons. People love that classic Stones period with, you know, Sticky Fingers and Let It Bleed and Beggar's Banquet and Exile on Main Street. Of course, these are the classic Stones albums, but boy, those early Stones albums are just killers and really worth diving into if you're a Stones fan at all, because there's some good stuff in there. And I thought it was cool that Adam sort of dug that little gem out of nowhere. Murderer One just killed. It was a really rockin' version, and it was at least it sounded like it was the last song they played on that night. although it doesn't come last in the bootleg, but it was like, this is the last song of the night. It seemed like they were done, and we'll, see you next time or something like that. And I thought, boy, they don't end shows like this anymore.
No. I mean, it really is I know that Rain King nowadays is their like crowd pleaser.
Yeah.
But Murder One is, I don't know, a showstopper, right? That's what that description is for. And it makes you a little nostalgic for that time.
It sure does. Yeah.
And it's an instrumental part of it. It's an instrumental showstopper. So I think, those guys are ready to rip on the guitar. Bring it back, guys. Bring it back. Yeah. Let's end some shows at Murder One again.
And and there's nothing that's more kind of crows than like the mix of like optimism and pessimism in their lyrics, and this one's like just the lyrics mixed with him like jumping around happy, but then like kind of angry, bittersweet lyrics and stuff. I love it. So okay, so for the last quarter of the disc, I love saying disc. We can't do that anymore. Good Night, Elizabeth, which I won't say much. I know that Chris will have his thoughts. Long December. Now, I can't remember. I had some notes here that there was some extra cool Charlie at the beginning with the accordion. Is that true? That he did some little extra flushes or touches? That's what I have there. Anyway, and then Anna Begins, which I actually thought, I don't know if this is ever done at the end of their encore ever, or I don't know. Maybe you saw it, Geoff.
Kitchener, believe it or not.
Oh, is that it was?
I did the same thing. I looked up the shows. I'm like, did they actually even ever close with Anna's? And Kitchener, they did.
They did.
Right
I
before
thought
Walkaways.
I thought it was a great closer. And I thought this was a fantastic version. I thought Charlie. I don't know. I just had that. Sometimes you wonder if it's the mix or whatever, but I put that there was a lot more instrumentation. Of course, by the way, one of the things was that they were doing the harder version of it, right? Not the album version. I said I had never heard such a dense arrangement, even now, that I thought there was more going on with it, but it didn't seem too crowded for me. I love Charlie on it, and then at the end, I'm guessing you notice this too, but their backup vocals, which goes to Jeff's point about the round here, it almost sounded like choir-ish to me a little bit with The Anna Begins. I don't know if anybody caught that part with their harmony at the end, but Chris, let's go to you.
Yeah. No, and a great group to end it. This version of Goodnight Elizabeth is kind of interesting. There's no alt per se, but there's kind of like an outro thing about not being able to get home, which I liked. It's a good version of the song. And yeah, Long December and Adam Begins both sounded great. I just have a note, like, I feel like Adam really killed on Adam Begins. I thought he sounded fantastic. But again, part of that is going to be he's sounding great because he's got the support of all these other great singers, and they're kind of figuring out, to your point about like their harmony vocals as a group. The Imi kind of, I don't know if it's Imi pulling it together or the work they were doing in the studio on This Desert Life that pulls it together, but it's a good point that the singing is really kind of on point all the way through this record. And maybe in some ways it sticks out on this record because once you get to something like Face the Promised Land, you're hearing This Desert Life songs that kind of already have it.
Yes.
Right? So it's interesting to hear these songs in a row like this. Again, it's like this is the set list from the old band in a lot of ways, but done with all of the various ways what the band is becoming in 99 2000. It's really it's a really interesting time capsule to listen to this one.
Great. Rich, your thoughts on the closing of the show?
I fully agree with Chris on his notes about Goodnight Elizabeth. I just love the whole lines around "Find My Way Back Home." With Long December, I like that he sang it flawlessly, and he does that thing which he so often does with this song. He kind of interrupts himself. He chuckled, he laughed, and then kind of went back into it. And I thought to myself, is that when he started doing that? Because I'm sure he didn't when he was originally touring the album during recovering. And near the end, you can hear the crowd screaming Anna. And then they went into Anna Begins, even though there were two different shows that were part of the compilation. So I don't know, maybe that was happening in both shows. And Anna Begins, the crowd's obviously very happy to hear it in the beginning. And I think, Eric, you mentioned around the vocals, the background vocals, they really stand out. Maybe it was the mix, but I thought it was beautiful. You can really hear that rain falls down coming from the background that I don't think I've ever heard it so clearly ever. anywhere else.
As I said, if you go back now, I think to me it almost sounds like a choir is singing it. Like it seems like there's 10. But I think I'd like to bring. And Chris, by the way, I wish that I was this smart, passionate, or whatever, the incisive, I guess that's the right word, about anything in my real life. But I like that I like that we were able to like piece together. I think you're exactly right that these extra harmonies and stuff, they were recording Desert Life in 98, right? A lot of it. So maybe you're right. Like 4 Days and some of those other songs already have absolutely fantastic harmony. And then they were maybe trying to add it retroactively to some of these. Let's go to Geoff.
Yeah, for sure. The same thing. Good Night, Elizabeth. I think it was really this show that made me come to appreciate what a great song that is. It's become one of my very favorite songs by them. Long December, Anna Begins. Interesting that they conclude with 3 ballads, and this is, as Rich said earlier, a curated show, a curated bootleg rather. It's not from a single show, as the Storytellers was, as the Across the Wire was from 2 different shows, and even the Denver bootleg was from a single show. So here we have their first sort of curated from some different shows, and they selected intentionally to end with these 3 ballads. I have always said that Counting Crows is such a strong band when it comes to ballads. It's not always a rock band strong suit, and it's one of their strongest suits is their ballads. And so here you have 3 very different types of ballads. And of course, I think ending with Anna Begins, to me, I've said before, it's my favorite Counting Crows song. I think that this version, it goes for the high notes, which are always my favorite versions. And I said this one was a really good, maybe I give it an 8 or 9. Maybe not transcendent, but a classic hit the high notes version. I really liked it a lot. We'll talk more about it. I thought the version he did at Woodstock was really, really spectacular. So I think in general, like, it's interesting to see the band at this period putting out a bootleg or sort of official bootleg. I do think, as I recall, I heard you talking about this in the last show. I did, and Rich mentioned it earlier tonight, but I think this was from like the fan club somehow.
Well, it was from the official. I don't think you had to be a member of the fan club. The official website had it, but very limited pressing.
You could get it. And I think that, they were supportive of bootlegs. I remember them saying at the time, the reason they put out Across the Wire was there had been all these bootlegs that were inferior sounding, and they didn't like, what was coming out, or maybe didn't have the best performances. And so, here you see, it's kind of like now you hear they just put out all of their shows, and so, in some ways it's a precursor to that, where they're trying to release, more of their live shows, even through unofficial channels or whatever. Today, of course, everything comes out, but, I thought this was a particularly good bootleg. Like, I think Rich said the same thing. I hadn't really spent a lot of time with this bootleg. I hadn't really sat down and really given it a listen to the nuances from the different shows. And boy, I thought this one was really, really good. I loved it as a listen. Also, I'm going to just ask right here on the show, who is Barely Out of Tuesday? And can we give them a shout out for all of the incredible music? I wouldn't have been able to hear this without Barely Out of Tuesday. Who is, in my mind, I picture Barely Out of Tuesday as this person. I have no idea who it is, male, female.
Oh, you're talking about on YouTube.
Yes.
And they're also on Reddit. Yeah, I tried to...
Well, thank you, whoever you are, because...
Yeah, and they're pretty new, right? That channel, I think, is only like 2 or 3 years old, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong.
Clearly, this is somebody who knows Counting Crows really well.
Given the title, I assume it's Courtney Cox. And despite all the mean things Adam said about her, she's just a really huge fan.
All right, listen, come on. Y'all need to get in touch with Barely Out of Tuesday and have them on the show. Whoever it is, they need to be on the show. They clearly listen to the show, too, because sometimes we talk about something and then they'll post, like, the concert we're talking about. Seriously,
Oh, no, well,
thank you, Barely Out of Tuesday.
Thank you. Yankee, yes.
The person can respond, but I yes, only 2 years ago. That's the original post. No, I actually I have to check my notes, but I think I did reach out very early on, and they declined.
Oh,
so
it's Adam. It's actually Adam. That's who it is.
But I'll have to go back to my notes on either YouTube or I forget where I contacted.
Well, Billy, on Tuesday, I know you're listening. Thank you, and come on the show sometime and talk about all this amazing. You have the incredible collection. So
thank you for getting this stuff up there on YouTube. It's
amazing,
yeoman's work. It's so hard. I feel like we talked about it, right? Rich talked about it earlier. Like in the modern world, the way the music spreads around is so different. So getting it up on YouTube, I think, is very important. It's very important work. So that people can hear these things because it's
totally.
These are classics.
Yes, these are classics.
Absolutely. Thanks, Geoff, for mentioning. It's maybe for another time, but about the thing about first of all, I didn't realize the 3 ballads to end it, and then you're right that some bands of this era felt they had to do ballads and they're not that good. But then there's also the opposite. I particularly think of glam rock bands who maybe actually had some talent and they were only known for their ballads, even though that was only 2 songs of their 12. And I guess other bands were like that too. So I actually think, of course, we love Crows, that their ability to write good ballads and mid-tempo songs and hard rockers like 1492 and Have You Seen Me Lately separates them from other bands. So.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
I'm going to offer a hot take. I think Anna Begins is better than Every Rose Has Its Thorn.
Yes.
Second. All in favor?
Hot take.
My hot take is that Poison is the most overrated of the glam bands, and I felt that way since 1990. So that's
dude, now you're
we might have to have
words, my friend. I'm gonna defend Poison. I will defend.
My wife would run in.
Oh, that's funny that you defend. Right, because I do like.
First of all, you opened the can of worms, buddy. So I gotta go here.
Poison.
Poison's a phenomenal live band. Phenomenal live band. You great live act. Fun, good live band. So
Still,
I'll just say that. So, the last time I saw them was in 2000, I think. I did interview the drummer when I was a music journalist, and he was the nicest guy. Guy. Those are the nicest guys, and. Say about them what you will. They do their thing. They know their lane very well. And they are one of the funnest, most entertaining, good time live acts you'll ever see, probably still today.
I will say Rock of Love, one of the great television shows of all time.
Oh, it's funny. No shade on glam rock, which I liked. I just remember fighting with, talking about 90s, and this came up with vice president. They're working at, fast food in high school in the 90s, and I remember fighting about what were the best, hip-hops and what were the best glam rock bands. And I remember, I was in the Poison's not as good as people think they are, but I could have been wrong.
Well, I'm not going to say they're like musical geniuses or anything, but they're a really fun live act, and they know who they are. They're not trying to be,
Okay.
Wait till you see Brett. Go on YouTube, Eric. Find Bret Michaels serenading a stripper from Atlanta who's trying to win his love on a VH1 reality show with Every Rose Has Its Thorn.
All right, I'll have to check that out.
My God,
that's the way to hear that song.
Look,
I think we're going to listen to that 3-hour podcast.
Crystal was very misunderstood. I think is a big part.
Oh, that's funny. So, with that, speaking of '90s bands and that '90s, which we've said a couple times on this podcast, which speaking as old men, looking back, we thought we love that they had a wide, people of our generation loved a wide variety of music, right? We went out to the record store and bought metal, glam rock with hip hop, with just general top 40, etc., which I think is mostly true from our college roommate CD collections and whatnot. But that might be very well encapsulated by the people that played at Woodstock in 94 and 99. And we're not going to do this is not a Netflix special. We won't do a huge recap, but just to put things in perspective, that Woodstock, right? The original was 69, and then 25 years later, they had one in 1994, which I didn't look that up for this, but I do remember that my friends went, and I stayed at home, and my mom was having a yard sale, and I promised to help her. And in 99, so I guess it was
you're a good son.
I'm a good son.
That's right.
It didn't help our relationship, but I did help her there. And then 5 years, I guess it was a success, because 5 years later they had one, and then that was the infamous one. And this would have been, like Chris said, if they were going to do another 25 years, this would have been the year to have a reunion of Woodstock, and it did not happen.
Well, they tried to do a 50 in 2019, and either it didn't sell or some.
So they did. Okay,
that happened.
Okay. So Crows played at Woodstock in 99, and I can talk about some stuff, but let's move on. I don't know if you wanted to just put anything in context before we talk about their actual performance at Woodstock 99. Chris, I'll go to you.
Well, I'll say this. It's interesting to look at the lineup on the day they were playing. I definitely did not go to Woodstock 99. I was 16, and I don't think my mother was going to let me go to that. I don't know if I would have even thought to do it. I do recall, I think some of this streamed on the radio. I have a vague recollection of listening to The Offspring for some reason. I don't know why The Offspring, but they were fine. And so here's the lineup for the Crows stage on Saturday, their main stage. Tragically Hip, Kid Rock, Wyclef Jean with the Refugee All-Stars, Counting Crows, so they're kind of in the middle of this group here. Dave Matthews Band, Alanis Morissette, Limp Bizkit, Rage Against the Machine, and Metallica. So just first off, interesting lineup, right? A lot of people who are still... It's interesting. I felt like when I went to look at this lineup, I thought I was going to see bands that were irrelevant now, and kind of a lot of them are still relevant in one way or the other, which I was kind of surprised at. And also, though, just the weird energy of where rock music was going at that point, where bands like Alanis Morissette, Dave Matthews, Counting Crows, who kind of hit in the mid 90s, in that time period where rock music was very had moved toward that certain, away from grunge and into this sort of Americana-y sort of thing that was still, I don't know, I really like that mid 90s era. Even now, I'm wearing an Oasis t-shirt as we record this. Weezer, I like that. And then you kind of got to that point where things moved towards Limp Bizkit, and obviously Metallica was always popular. Metallica was a very big band at that point. And I recall liking those bands fine, but it almost was that thing where I think a lot of us liked those bands because they were set against the teeny bopper bands, right? It's like, whoa, do you like Limp Bizkit or the Backstreet Boys? Like, well, if I'm picking one, I'm going to go with the Limp Bizkit, but I don't really feel strongly about Limp Bizkit. It's a weird era, and I feel like Woodstock 99 is this weird encapsulation of that era where it's very corporate, right? It's like Woodstock on an Air Force base, which is strange. There's 220,000 people there, and no one's got water, and obviously more hot takes, lots of terrible shit happened there. Go, again, as Eric said, we won't get deep into it. Go watch the documentaries. There's 2 about how bad this stuff was. It's like that in the Fire Festival, but at least bands played at this one. So, props to them for that. It's this kind of, it's weird to put the Crows in that context, even though, of course, they're a very large band. People seem perfectly excited to see them. We'll talk about their video in a minute. But it's a very strange to kind of put back together what 1999 was like from a musical perspective.
I love looking at these, especially, I look at like emerging artist stage and like, did any of these actually become famous? And the answer for most of them is no, except for Moby was on the emerging artists, which I thought was pretty interesting. But when you said the East stage for the West stage at the same time, I guess this is the best when you talk about putting this together. Look at this. Look at 4 of these. Bruce Hornsby, Everclear, followed by Ice Cube, followed by Los Lobos, and then a little bit the Chemical Brothers. That's the best. I love that.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot. It's very diverse.
Yeah.
Yes,
very diverse.
Yeah. It was more in the diverse, just the way it was back then. By the way, I don't know if you're going to bring this up, Geoff. Little fun fact that Gigolo Ants, who was signed to Adam's label, also did play. They were in the rave. They were the second headliner, right behind Fatboy Slim, at the rave tent on Saturday. So, Rich, any thoughts about Woodstock 99 in general? I actually was for the 99. I was in Europe, so I couldn't. I don't know if I would have went anyway. But Rich,
well, 94 though, real quick. I remember being in Myrtle Beach. My friends and I, we rented a minivan. 6 of us went to Myrtle Beach for a week, and we're there going, should we go to Woodstock instead? But we had a great time in Myrtle Beach. But 99, it's like, I don't remember 99 happening. And I was in the Air Force at the time out in Wyoming. And we didn't talk about this before, but I was a nuclear launch officer. So I think I was underground for like 3 days during Woodstock and missed it. But I think at that point I was 24, and I think that's a point where I felt myself starting to separate from what was becoming the next phase of American popular music that Chris, you talked about. Because I mean, I just loved the stuff that coming out in the mid '90s, that Americana type rock you mentioned, and I won't name bands, but a lot of stuff that was becoming very popular, and were heavily featured in those documentaries for the way they inspired their crowds. I just didn't want any part of it. Um, but some of these bands I really loved, and after looking and preparing for this show, I didn't realize so much of it is out there and that you can watch. So I kind of want to go back now and see some of these bands that are still touring and good, that played that time.
Geoff, before we go to you on another one to make you laugh, on the West Stage on Friday, so because Crows were on Thursday, I think, or no, they were on Saturday. West Stage on Friday, the last three bands, so the major three headliners out of 9 were The Roots, followed by Insane Clown Posse, followed by George Clinton. So
Wow.
So stay there and listen up. So Geoff,
my friend saw the Insane Clown Posse this week.
Okay.
Said it was a great show. Although the openers weren't great, and apparently there were like rockets of their weird soda coming off the stage.
Oh my God.
I will defend Insane Clown Posse till the day. No, I'm kidding.
We never would have seen that on Sullivan Street. Who would have guessed?
Yeah, that's right.
Geoff, go to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, not too much to add to what others have said. I think something that was interesting that occurred to me as I was, thinking about this show and thinking about, the lineup and everything else, and also the original Woodstock, is that if you think about not the original Woodstock, but it was sort of like the dream of the 60s was realized at Woodstock and Monterey Pop, these big festivals, but also the dream of the 60s kind of died at Altamont, the famous festival in San Francisco where the Hells Angels were the security and the Rolling Stones and the Grateful Dead and others played. Shout out to Phil, who passed away this week, great bassist for the Grateful Dead. That was very sad news. That show was kind of like the end of the 60s with Altamont, this festival that turned very violent, a lot of drugs, a lot of problems, somebody died. And so here, are there parallels that we can draw? Not to be, too heavy handed with it, but what I saw, something that you guys were kind of mentioning too. It's like 1999 was not so much like, the death of the 90s, but it was kind of like the death of 90s rock. This was the end of rock bands being dominant in popular culture. All of those rock bands that dominated through the 90s, they were done by the, 2000s. They were all done. A lot of these bands, yes, they're still around and they can play and they're popular, but they're not at the center of popular culture. The Red Hot Chili Peppers can still sell out an arena, but they're not making records that people listen to or care about anymore, other than obviously they're hardcore fans. And I think that's true for a lot of these bands that are still around. Metallica fans still love Metallica, but nobody thinks they're putting out Master of Puppets, in 2024. So I think in some ways this was kind of like this very violent festival with all of these problems, in some ways marked like the end of the 90s, the end of the rock era, the end of rock bands being dominant. And then also, we do get not too long into the 2000s, which is like, it just come up, but everything from Columbine to 9/11, we were sort of entering this new scary world. And the death and dream of the 90s, you do sort of maybe see some parallels there in this festival too. So yeah, a weird time in music and a weird festival for the Crows to be playing. I've seen some clips of Adam talking about it recently too, and his experiences there. So we can talk about that too. But yeah, a strange show. I do think that if you look at the footage of like Limp Bizkit, people picked on them in those documentaries as being like, "Oh, these guys were so terrible." It's like, man, their show looked awesome to me. Like if you just look at the show, it looks like a great show. And these guys, none of these bands can see much of what's going on. They talk about that. Right. It's like they're up playing a show. I mean, there's been so many tragedies. Pearl Jam, The Who, others where horrible tragedies have occurred at their concerts, not because they were, ever wanted something like that to happen. So obviously that's just terrible. And you hear even Adam talking about that in the show, asking the crowd to move back and saying people are turning blue and stuff. So yeah.
It's kind of the end of the monoculture in music, right? What kind of happens, right? The idea that the idea that people who like Counting Crows and Dave Matthews would go to the same festival as people who like Metallica, and the same festival of like Mickey Hart, Planet Drum, is playing on that stage on that same day, and Guster, who was like very, the sweet. I loved Guster, but like very different energy. The idea that those would all come together and that was a good idea, kind of dies almost right after that. You've got the internet, but you've also just got this general niche atomization of culture where like, what's the next big music festival? It starts to be stuff like Bonnaroo, right? Bonnaroo, which had a little bit of overlap and stuff later on, but really started out as basically like a jam band festival, right? You started to see more like there's a rock festival and there's a jam band festival and there's a folk festival, as opposed to the idea that, oh yeah, all of these people, which is kind of weird, right? It's kind of a bummer because we're all talking about, we liked a lot of these bands and a lot of very diverse bands on this list. At the same time, from a like, are these the people you want to spend a weekend with kind of thing? I think that's where the world has kind of split. And one might say the world has atomized in other ways. That's a different topic. But it's also the beginning right before the internet, right? Like this is really right where Napster is starting to hit and start to really bring the sort of niche music culture that becomes the thing over the next 25 years. It's the last moment, because those next rock bands, right? I mean, even though they're big, quote unquote, the Strokes and the White Stripes and the Killers are not nearly Metallica and like, Korn from a monoculture size perspective.
No, I think you're exactly right. And I think that's why up to, not recently, but even like up to 10 years ago, they would make a big deal. Like if, Red Hot Chili Peppers is playing somewhere. Like they would talk about it in the local news because there wasn't many new rock bands that were also monoculture. So that's why it's not like I think the 90s bands were that much greater, but it's that it was when people, and I think there's nothing, I don't want to go too far off the deep end, but I think there's nothing that shows this more than who do you pick to be on the Super Bowl halftime show. And it used to be always rock bands, Aerosmith, and we have U2, and the last two that we had, which were I think the two last examples of monoculture rock, and even those were kind of controversy, which were Coldplay did, what was that was like almost 10 years ago now, because you could say they're kind of monoculture, and then who's the other one?
Maroon 5.
Maroon 5, exactly. Yeah. Good. They kind of had crossover appeal, because now if you had to argue about monoculture now in the US, you'd pick hip hoppy type
Taylor
acts.
Swift.
Taylor Swift, exactly. Taylor Swift and hip hoppy acts, and then look who's been in the last, Usher and Rihanna and Dr. Dre and The Weeknd, and I think that makes sense. Now I think this year's Super Bowl, see what happens. This year's kind of interesting, or the next one, because it's Kendrick Lamar, who did not really have, I don't want to say mainstream, but you know what I mean? It wasn't like songs that multi-generations listened to, and he didn't have a lot of poppy songs where, hey, Dr. Dre had California Love and some of these like kind of ubiquitous songs that are still played to this day, and same with Rihanna and Usher. So I think it's going to be interesting, the reception that he gets. But anyway, don't want to talk about too much.
Yeah, but it's like, who's left who could do, I mean, like, I guess the Killers, like, I mean, if you've gone to a music festival in the last 10 years or so, you've probably seen the Killers headline a music festival, because there's like 6 rock bands that can do it. So like, unless you're getting people back together, I guess Oasis could maybe, or like if you got No Doubt together, I don't know, like, but there's not a lot at this point.
No.
Apparently Oasis can still sell a lot of tickets, I'm told.
It's true.
Gonna go see it. Gonna be great.
That was a great intro. I did think it put things in perspective, and I think it's also why Crows still right, because of the kind of monoculture, why they still attract people of a certain age to attend their shows.
I will add this. I feel like the Crows, they really, if you go back to the original Woodstock, they would have fit right into that type of concert.
Good point.
I think they had that spirit. Just was weirdly placed in '99.
And Santana. I mean, how do we not mention Santana at least once in this whole show yet? That the original Woodstock, of course, featuring one of the most incredible live performances you'll ever see from Santana. Go watch it if you haven't seen it. My God.
I've heard that.
And Neil Schon from a 16-year-old kid named Neil Schon from the band Journey was on guitar. Wow.
Yeah. Insane Hendrix. I mean, there is a great, by the way, if people are looking, have not really delved into the Old Underwater Sunshine podcast, they did a six episode deep dive into the original Woodstock.
Wow.
Called An Aquarian Exposition.
Okay.
Is worth checking out if that's you can hear a lot of different stuff. But I also think it's part of just to transition to the Crow set, right? Like clearly Woodstock is a very meaningful thing for Adam, right? He's coming into this kind of like, fuck, we're gonna do Woodstock. This is awesome. And you can almost see as the show is rolling along, him kind of going like, man, I thought this was going to be different. I don't know exactly what I thought this was going to be. Not this. Didn't think this was what we were going to see out here because it's a weird video to watch.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
I was just going to say, if you look at also like the Wikipedia page or something for the original Woodstock, the 94 Woodstock, and then the 99, it's like the lineups for the original, it's very small. There's not that many acts. I mean, relatively. Go look, it's not that many. You get a few more in 94, but boy, in 99, it just blows up into this much more like corporate Lollapalooza, more contemporary model. And you see also, I think the 94 show, the thing I remember about that show, it was like 9 Inch Nails getting out and jumping in the mud was like the iconic thing from that show. And it got like some, people were like, yeah, Woodstock 94 was cool. By 99, it was like you could see all the bands just went, okay, we're going to sign on to this thing because it's the cool thing to do,
So 99 must be double the size.
Yeah. So you could tell that they just went, let's just blow this up into the biggest, T-shirts and $6 water and all that stuff. So.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, so let's segue right into their set list. So I'll let you guys comment. I do have some other observations where I try to watch it and listen to it at the same time on YouTube, and I have some side notes I'll write at the or say at the end. But I'll just go over the set list. So it's almost similar to the by the time we got to Woodstock in length. What is it? 12 songs I have, or 11?
11,
yeah. So Mr. Jones, Angels of the Silences, we just said that. Then Rain King, Anna Begins, which we just covered. Omaha, Recovering Satellites, which we just covered. Round Here, Hanging Around, which was not on the bootleg, featuring the Gigolo Ants. I guess they did come out for that, even though they were on a different stage. Long December, Have You Seen Me Lately, which they confirmed was the mid-tempo. And then ending with Murder of One. And was it between Hanging Around and Long December that the crowd was yelling "Water, water"? If you listen to, I couldn't sense it out at first, but there was like "water," and I was like, "Are they saying what?" And then someone confirmed that on the because it was weird. Like, why then? I guess because it was some break in the action. But somebody started.
They all wanted water. It was very hot, apparently.
Exactly.
But no, the whole vibe. I mean, you watch. So there's a lot of. If you watch any of the Woodstock '99 stuff, there's a lot of crowd shots. Yeah. And like the juxtaposition, like they get to the quiet part in Recovering the Satellites, and on the screen is a topless lady who's getting kicked by someone who's crowd surfing. Like it's the energy doesn't really match in the crowd and on stage, at least what we can see. It's a weird show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I have other comments, but Rich, do you want to say anything either about their performance or during their set list kind of thing?
A couple of things. When the third song, Round King, it was funny because they introduced it. Like, here's a song from the first album. It's called true. Rain King. And I'm like, you got to introduce Rain King? Like, everyone knows Rain King, 99. But it kind of dawned on me that they were probably being honest, that they didn't assume that they're all fans and knew the whole catalog and were going to try to win some new audience over still early in their set list. So, yep, that stuck out to me. I don't know. Come back to me. Let's go through some of the songs I'll pipe in. General thoughts on some.
Yeah, Geoff, any thoughts on that? I said they might not be that much different than the ones we just covered, which were recorded a week before with better acoustics, probably, and all that kind of stuff.
Different vibe. Well, I mean, I think one thing about it was a note I had about these shows, but I think you see it more with Woodstock because, probably the rest of you, I watched this on YouTube because you can see the whole show. And so I think one thing about this period and this whole, desert life sort of turn that was coming, was that Adam was really also figuring out who he was going to be as a live performer. And I think you see a marked change in this era from who he was as a live performer. The original Adam Duritz was, sensitive. He was frail. He was, a poet. He was, you could throw him off of his game, if you said something at the show or whatever. But in this era, he changed. He really opened up as a performer. He was much less introverted, much less sensitive and frail, much more extroverted, and decided to, I think, embrace his role as a frontman. I mean, you completely see it at Woodstock. He's standing up on the this is standing on the monitors at him, and I mean, maybe that was always a hallmark of what they did, but to me, he changed a lot as a performer here. And so you saw that in the ideology of the band. We're gonna play Mr. Jones first. They did it here too. This is a declaration of intent. We're reclaiming this song. We're reclaiming who we are as a live band. We're not embarrassed about this song anymore. We're not embarrassed about having a hit anymore. We're gonna play this song first and reclaim it. But also he was really opening up as a live performer, and I think you see who he is now, which is a guy who reaches out to the audience and who realizes that his, like as he talked about it on this new podcast, that his, job as he sees it is deliver an incredible performance every single night, and so that means that it's not, as he said, he talks about it. Now, you should all go listen to the podcast, but he says it's really not about what happens with the audience at all. He says your job is to deliver it because you don't know what's going on 10 rows back or 25 rows back. Your job is to create on that stage with those musicians the most incredible performance and performance of that people will talk about for 20 years. They'll talk about this one show. He says, my job is to do that every night. And so he talked about how I don't really care if the audience is good or bad, because our job is the same no matter what. And you don't know what's going on with that whole audience. So I really, I really think that he embraced being a front man and a live performer and decided that, they talked about Springsteen having the same revelation early on, that he decided, went from being this introverted guy at the piano to, Bruce Springsteen, the most charismatic frontman you'll ever see. So I think Adam really took that on in this period. And as a result, the band was able to, find itself at a whole new point in its career and to further itself in ways that a lot of bands faltered at this point. A lot of those bands faltered at this point. A lot of those big bands, the Weezers and the Gusters of the big 90s bands, this is where they went down. But they really, Counting Crows pivoted and I think had a strong turn, and they had hits and they became a really great live band. And you start to really see that here. Not a band that, the super fans like, but a band that anybody can go see and go, wow, they're incredible. So.
Yeah, I've heard Adam talk about the idea that early on he felt like if he was having a bad day, he needed to bring that out on stage.
Yeah.
Whereas there's we hit the flip side where he says, no, if I'm having a bad day, it's a joyous thing to go sing. And I can be
right.
You can use that energy very differently. Because especially it improves, you can see the difference if you go tour to tour, right? 94, he's very much just curled up basically and very introverted.
Right.
97, it's less so, but it's still not, to your point, Geoff, it's still not a full, hey, I'm going to go out here and I'm going to put on this show with my band. And we're going to do whatever. And here, I'm with you. Clearly stuff is getting real weird out there. He can see it. They talk about it at points, right? These people are turning blue in the front row. Right. Back up, everyone. Please stop pushing forward. But in the middle of the songs, you wouldn't know that. They're having a great time. He's performing out and he's delivering the songs as best he can. And they're fighting through it and fighting through the sound. I kind of noticed this time at the very beginning, Matt
terrible.
is clearly struggling with his bass. You'll hear these random pops of bass and it's he's clearly trying to get sound to come out, the beginning of Mr. Jones. He's I don't know, and you can finally hear it click in somewhere in the middle, but it's not. This is bad. The sound is not good.
Yeah.
They're figuring it out as they go, but you wouldn't know that from watching.
They didn't
He's
get
not
a sound
letting
check,
it affect them.
Yeah.
Clearly, no.
Yeah, and I don't think that was his messing up, right? Someone wrote in the comments, oh, he doesn't know what song he's playing or something. I think it was a sound issue. Yeah.
Yeah,
and you can almost see it in the video. He's kind of clearly going like something's going on, and he's trying to get the sound right to properly play the bass.
Yeah.
Jeff and Chris, thanks for bringing that up. Not that I knew it was going to come up in this episode. I didn't, but I had thought, I think I mentioned it one other time that, and again, I actually hadn't seen them live until after this. The first time I saw them was basically when they released Desert Life. So I never caught it, but from my thoughts or recollection, but you can also hear, I think, in the storytellers and the 10th spot. I know like they do Murder One and some hard songs, and he does speak up about voting or whatever, but but yeah, I mean, even when he starts storytellers, it's like, hey, how you do? Like very, like you said, this kind of right.
Yeah.
Hi, like don't talk to me. He has his head down, like almost the hair is covering him a little bit,
Totally.
right?
Yeah.
And I absolutely agree that, and I know some of that's maturity and just getting older, and it's kind of that Gen X. I know he's not Gen X, right? He's the generation with no label, right? He said, but. Yeah, I do think that that's not talked about as much. And at one point he embraced it because he always did want to be a lead person. I think it was more about him finding his persona and voice and getting older and all that. So Jeff, I agree. Thanks for bringing that up. Because I joke, because even when I think it was at Face the Promised Land, I even heard a little, or anyway, with these bootlegs, I heard a little bit. It was like you said, the transition where I could hear a little bit of both the introvert and the extrovert there.
Mm-hmm. So I thought it was pretty brave of him to play some of these songs at Woodstock. To play Anna Begins.
Yeah, right.
Just pretty quiet song.
Yeah.
And I think they did a pretty good job at doing it and bringing the crowd with them along for some of those quieter moments.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And you see people like crowd surfing during, some of the slow songs, and you're thinking this is a weird juxtaposition. But I thought that the set list was like, okay, we're going to hit you with every crowd pleaser that we have from the first two albums. Really, it was like, which is, of course, what you want to do at a festival and what you want to do at Woodstock, and you want to play your best songs there and represent yourself. But to me, it's like coming out with Mr. Jones first, Rain King's third, Anna Begins, which is it's a slow song, but it's a song that everybody loves so much from the first album. And I think even people know that song. Omaha, another beloved song. It's like they're really coming out with all the classics. Of course, you get Round Here. So they were just, I thought that they were bringing out their A-list materials and the songs that I would go over with a crowd that big. But it was interesting to see him pull out Long December, Anna Begins, try to pull in a crowd that size to Round Here, wild.
Yeah. Well, they do the alt. I mean, they do, this is one they had done a bit where Adam tells sort of the short version. He's told longer versions of it, of like living at a warehouse in Berkeley with Emmy. Mm-hmm. And he does the "Did you think that you were dreaming?" He also does the thing. He's like, "How many people here? 1 million?" And that's when I went and looked it up, and I was like, "Oh, it's 220,000."
Yeah,
because 1 million would be the biggest crowd. 220,000 is still a lot. The largest.
How does that rank with them? Yeah.
Well, I think it's certainly the biggest they've played in front of. It's one of. 220. I think is still one of the biggest in like modern American music. I think still the largest is Watkins Glen, is the Grateful Dead and the Allman Brothers, which was estimated at 500,000 or 600,000 in '73. But 220 is still a huge number.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. Oh yeah,
a lot of people.
Sure, a lot of people.
So I guess let's go around to just any other final comments about anything. But I just had a couple notes about their performance in general, not necessarily tied to any song. One for it's so weird because this is during their glory days, or this is when studio album wise, this was the band, right, with Matt and Ben. But when the first one, Ben, I almost went to a double take, and I was like, oh, Jim, like he didn't look that much different than Jim to me. Partly because he was younger back then, and the clothes he was wearing was something
short
that Jim
hair
would wear. Yeah, he had short hair, and I was
long hair at points, but this time he had a kind of buzz.
Yeah,
it was a very Jim-like haircut.
Yeah, I was like, Jim dyed his hair a little or something, and I said, wait a minute, that's not Jim, that is Ben.
Yeah.
And he played I thought he played pretty well here. Anyway, I know that a lot of these songs, well, I shouldn't say that, the recovering songs are his.
Yeah.
I always laugh seeing Vickery with no hat. That was in his no hat era. Now, this was interesting because Matt, when we interviewed Matt, he kind of, he said he didn't like being in the front, and I thought he said that like when Emmy joined, then he started moving back, right? He didn't have to be in the front, but this one, he was in the front. So there was 4 people in the front, right? that he was up there with, if anything, Bryson was kind of further back, of course, than Mally, which that always, and again, Matt kind of hams it up a little bit.
I think it's kind of later. Maybe it's late because I feel like by the time I started seeing them, like 2003, Matt's definitely sort of like standing in the back.
Yeah, he did eventually.
Jim.
Yeah.
So yeah, as we go through some of these years, we'll have to kind of keep an eye on that.
Yeah.
Mally Watch.
And Mally Watch, exactly. and you know what caught me? The other thing that caught me. So, and again, I was half watching it because I was doing stuff at work. But and you know me, a big Charlie fan, Charlie stalker or whatever. And there was a couple times that Charlie is just standing,
singing. I noticed that too.
I loved it, and it was in Angels, and I think Long December. No, was it Long December? There was something near the end. Might have been Anna Begins. Maybe it was Anna Begins. It might have been Angels and Anna Begins, but he is just doing his backup vocals on. I don't know. I thought it was interesting and great.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you had that. The only other thing, and this is for all you, this is for Chris and Rich, the bootleg people, is that it got me thinking with Rain King. I love when they end it instead of his little hey. I love like why don't you come out from the rain? And I was always wondering when did that actually start? He actually obviously still does it to this day. Did this start around then, or did he do it earlier? I'm not sure.
I think it was right around then because I think Face Promised Land was one of the first times I heard it.
Okay. So anyway, those are my observations. Yeah. And I don't know if anybody has anything else to add to their performance or most of the
two little things.
Yeah, please.
So in around here, I liked how he tried quieting the crowd. He's like trying to just bring him down. And then Charlie, because I love Charlie too, he goes into some beautiful piano in the middle of around here. And then later on flips back to electronic organ, I believe. But the piano in the middle around here, that was really special. And then in Hanging Around, they did it with the Gigolo Ants. And he talks about how it's coming. And I felt it was just finally, after all these years and having really seen that performance, it's like closure because of Face of Promised Land. They left because it was snowing, Gigolo Ants. They left to go to the next gig. And so they performed without him. And so I'm like, finally, we got to see Gigolo Ants with the Crows sing Hanging Around together.
Nice.
It's good.
Your personal bootleg redemption right there.
Yeah.
Went full circle.
Finally, I could die a happy man. I don't know.
Any other kind of closing comments? If you will?
The twin guitar attack from the twin guitar leads from Emmy and Dan on Angels of the Silences. I go watch it again. It's wild. Those two are trading leads back and forth, and they're also playing simultaneously twin lead guitar, a la Iron Maiden, who did it first. I love it. It's very cool. And I noticed it on Woodstock. Didn't really stand out to me on the bootleg. I didn't go back to hear, did they do this on the bootleg this way? But clearly they were working together and also going back and forth, playing leads back and forth. It was very cool and something worth revisiting, something you don't see a lot from those two guys. And I like that a lot, like a nice little moment there.
It's funny. My notes from that song just say, Dan and Emmy shredding.
Yes, totally. Yeah, right.
It's really good.
I also thought, something I noticed, of course, you're like, oh, yeah, Ben Mize is on drums. So that's interesting. I don't think I've said this on here before, but it's something I've just a thought that I've had is that it's interesting how changing the drummer in Counting Crows has never really mattered at all to how they impacted their sound at all. And I say that because sometimes you change the drummer and it changes everything about the band. It's like, oh, the magic's gone. Guns N' Roses comes to mind. It's like they changed drummers. They got a competent drummer, a professional and all that kind of stuff. But whatever it was, that magic pixie dust was gone and it was the drummer. Think of what Dave Grohl added to Nirvana, how much he just completely changed that band's sound. Sometimes the drummer's the key. I think Ringo is also one of the keys to the Beatles sound. But, here it's like you put in Ben Mize or, Jim, any of these drummers, not to say that they're interchangeable, but just to say that the key to the Counting Crows sound is not in the drummer. It's in Adam, and you really see that here.
I'll push back a little bit, only in that I do think live, and I used to put it to the fact that he was 10 years younger, but there are certain parts that he emphasizes more or puts more energy in than Ben did, even if they're playing the same notes at certain things.
Jim does, you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was that enthusiasm, and I can't think of any examples right now, but I certainly have a bunch.
That Ben Folds on the radio right now.
On the radio, which I said. Well, but even like High Life, there are a number of songs that I want to say he rocks it more in concert, even though I'm not sure on the recordings that things would have been that different. That's just my.
Yeah, I do like Jim's energy and a lot, for sure. I think that he brings a lot to the group and a lot of positive energy, but. It kind of is interesting how the key to the band sound to me is not in the drummer, because as they've changed across albums, I don't even. Sometimes you have to go look them up. Like, who's playing drums on this? I don't know.
Yeah.
I have to listen.
There's parts of Saturday Nights and Sunday Mornings, right, where Ben is drumming.
That's right,
because they're using old songs, and it's not dramatically noticeable. I do think one of the things that's happened is that Millard and Jim together. There's some things that they've figured out over time, but part of that's, I think, purely almost like a time thing. You think about it, it's like they've been playing these songs together now for 19 years.
Yeah.
Which is by longer than anyone else was in the band. They've been together in this band. So it's kind of, I think, there's a little bit, part of, I think, what you're hearing, Eric, right, is the fact that they've developed some different things over time and cool things. In relative terms, Ben's great, but like in a lot of ways right now, the sound of the band from that bass and drum perspective is those two guys. They've been doing literally more than half the existence of the band is just those two guys. It's interesting.
Don't get me wrong. I'll think back about this a little more, Geoff. I don't know if this can be done because it could be a mixing thing, but in my instinct is that Jim, does this make sense? Changes the volume of the drums a little more in the songs, where Ben was a little more monotone. I want to say, even if they're playing the same notes. But again, I'll listen a little more. But no, great comments. Anybody else? I was just laughing. The YouTube, and it's on. The whole performance is on YouTube. I'll link it to the thing. It's on. I saw Woodstock Poland. Maybe other people posted it. All the comments are either commenting on the thing itself or bashing the Crows. Of course, this is not a. Stuff like, I've tried to listen to them so many times. I just don't get why they're popular. And great band, but horrible front man. Like, it's all stuff. Like, they can't even say Adam.
It's interesting that it's up though, because I definitely tried to put this up at one point and got a copyright thing. So whoever owns the rights to that now is chiller about it than they were however many years ago when I tried to put it up there. So thankfully, people can go watch it now.
Get it while you can, people, because you never know. It might be gone tomorrow.
It is interesting how it comes and goes. The 10 Spot show is back up now.
Really?
I had it up there for a long time, and then it got taken down, rights thing, and now someone else put it up there. It's been up there for a few months. It comes up in my recommendations.
I didn't want to tell you guys this, but my last name's Kalesa. It's my Polish cousin. I just took care of it.
You are barely out of Tuesday.
Exactly.
I've looked in the mirror and found thy enemy right here.
Well, what a fun show! It was cool to recap 90s and to talk about and really this two episode set, I guess, of their official bootlegs.
Yeah, the last show was really fun too to listen to, guys. I thought that was really everybody's comments were super interesting and it was fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about one of the more mainstream official bootlegs in future episodes, right? Like the Heineken Hall and those kind of shows that had more than a press of 200 copies or whatever these were.
Right. You could actually get those and they stream and you can listen to those.
Yeah.
They should put these up. Let's make that pitch too, guys. Counting Crows, put these up for streaming.
Yes.
People want to hear them. Make it easy. Sure. They're official live releases. No one can find them. People have traded them, Geoff. People have traded them for a long time because they were out of print. It's the sort of principle of like, if the band's not selling it, may as well share it. But I think they should throw these up on Spotify and get some streams, and people should be able to hear them.
That's true. It's probably something that nobody even thought of, like that they're just not thinking about. And another great point.
The fine people of Potato Dog Records need to listen to
That's right. Rich, we know that's you. No, I'm kidding.
That's my other cousin.
Well, thanks, everybody. So thanks for the great episode, and we'll see the listeners back here soon, down here on Sullivan Street. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.